of science. We're now told there are 25 or 26 different dimensions, maybe with sound, maybe with meditation, maybe with special skills. We can go out of body. We know that our brain, 6% of the dry matter of our brains, is made up of what are called monatomic elements. And monatomic elements can flip into other dimensions, and maybe that structure within our brain will allow us to do that as well. But there's no direct teaching about spiritualism as such, but there is a direct link to meditation and, if you like, mind control, being at peace with oneself. But my belief is that the ancients got themselves in really good shape by having a fantastic diet, really understanding diet, being able to prolong their lives much longer than we can prolong our lives now. That stored up ancient wisdom was very, very important. And I think that they were able to make far better use of their brains by self-discipline than we are today. So our objective today should be to have wonderful diets, take loads of exercise, see what we can do with our brains, test our brains to the limit in that extent, but don't please try and take the shortcuts which the so-called shaman take and use plants and substances and drugs, because it doesn't work, or in most cases it simply causes brain damage. And remember, shaman is a derivation of the name Shamash, who was one of the Shining Ones, one of the most important Shining Ones. Ogmash, Shamash goes back to Uta, and we're talking about people who were the people who invented music, the people who were astronomers, the people who were involved in the movements of the sun. They weren't worshipping the sun, they were measuring it, they were doing practical things. And my view is that they were smart enough to know that if you make use of your brain, you can do all sorts of things. There's a special reference about the Watchers arriving and landing on Mount Hermon, and this is the biblical records. And so the Watchers appear to be some different group coming along, but they weren't. They were supporters. They were supporting craftsmen and teachers. In those days, within the royal societies, rather like a village or a town now, a town runs and operates with 150 different craftsmen of different sorts: a teacher, a nurse, a doctor, a blacksmith, a stonemason, a carpenter, and on and on and on. And the Watchers were groups of people who all had these individual skills and trainings. So it was like a complete group of people from a town or a village who then became available to administer the work. And this is how the city-states operated. And so the Watchers essentially were craftsmen and teachers. They were in groups of 10, 50, 100, 200. 200 landed on Mount Hermon in the days of Jared. And they were there to support the whole operation of restarting civilization. And we see this within the city-states. We find this wonderful world of city-states, that within a town you have the land all round, you have your main building, which isn't a temple, it's a taimon, or administrative building. Much the same as the early mosques were administrative buildings where people could go, school, medicine, teaching everything that could be taught. Women were playing a major role in the administration and the cooking and the food. And even in the early days of Mesopotamia, we had centralized food at the taimons for the people of the town. It was so well organized. So in order to be able to make that function, you had to distinguish between the different crafts and trades. And fathers had to pass their knowledge to their sons, and sons to theirs, and they built up the trades. So the carpenters and the masons all passed their skills down. We all know about the masons, but there are 120 or 30 other crafts and guilds who operated just like the masons, with this very special knowledge of how things worked. And when a city grew to a certain size, population control being a major issue, that's why women were so much involved, and why women chose who they slept with and when they slept with, and would have wanted to know what the moon cycle was so that they could make decisions about when they were likely to give birth. So that cycles and the astronomy was as much a valuable tool and role for women as they were for the farmers. And so you have a situation where a young man would have had to do his 20 years training, and if he was good enough, he was selected to be a king. And in the ceremony which made him a king, he would have been handed the rod or the ruler, standard unit of measurement, the rolled measuring tape, and he would have taken those two practical things with him, and 150 craftsmen of all needed and their families, and would have gone there, or even overseas to start another city-state somewhere else. And it's like the egg dividing. It was such a marvellous system. And the king's job was to look after everybody, to make sure everybody was fairly treated. Nobody owned any land because the land was considered to be the property of the gods, and the king was the tenant of the gods. He didn't have any property or value or money. He couldn't be diverted onto things that weren't business. And as we saw this morning in that wonderful clip of the king of Ur taking the shrine of Ninkar into the marshland in the Mesopotamian plains, and visiting the villages and setting up her chair and her symbols and sitting in it and dispensing justice to the local people, just as our district magistrates did in India for 200 or 300 years, very successfully, 700 people running India with great success. We hear about the bad news, we don't hear about the good news. That's the way it actually worked. There are family trees and genealogies, and more work needs to be done to thoroughly check them on the kind of knowledge that we're now gaining, and particularly from proper translation of the ancient records. So it's almost certain that Anu was a perfectly ordinary, clever guy, if you like, who had a wife, maybe more than one wife, we don't know. He certainly had children. And so the danger has been, of course, is that when somebody is as important as him and had such a major impact as he did, he's then regarded as a god. And what we've done ever since is create our own gods. Man's very good at creating gods. We do it every week on telly, if you look at it in its own particular way. But the truth of the matter is that there's a lot of confusion in most people.